Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today we'll learn about how to process a vendor invoice through non-PO route. We'll learn what is a non-PO route and how we can process the vendor's invoice through this process in SAP. But before we start, if you are new to my channel or haven't subscribed yet, I would request you to kindly subscribe to my channel to get early notifications of all my content. So first of all, let's understand what is a non-PO route. Now previously in our channel, we have discussed that what is a Procure to Pay process. Now, if you haven't seen the video on that process, then I have kept the link in the description. You can check there. Now, in the Procure to Pay process, we understood that we create a purchase order, we do a goods receipt, and then we process the invoice through Myro transaction. Now, imagine a situation that due to urgency or some other reason, you do not place a purchase order on the vendor. You simply line up the vendor to do the activity, and once the vendor has done the activity, vendor submits its invoice. Now, in this case, we are going to skip all the steps of the Procure to Pay process. That is, we are not going to give any purchase order. We are not going to do any goods receipt, and because we have not placed any purchase order, so we will not be processing the invoice through Myro transaction also. So this is a simple case of supply of material or execution of services by the vendor where the formal purchase order in SAP was not placed. And because the purchase order is not placed, so the goods receipt step is also not done, and hence you cannot process the invoice through Myro. In this case, what you will do is you will directly process the invoice of the vendor through a T code, that is FB60, and here you will create the liability against the vendor. So in this process, that is the non-PO route, no GRI or account will get involved. You will simply receive the invoice from the vendor against the activity that the vendor has done for you, and then you will post that invoice through FB60 where you will create liability against the vendor and you do a debit entry against a consumption GL account. So now let's see this process in SAP and see that how we can process the vendor invoice through FB60. So now let's go to T code FB60. And you can see here, this screen looks similar to the Myro transaction. The only difference is that here you will not be entering any purchase order. You will be entering directly the vendor code here. You can see there is a field for supplier. So first we'll enter the supplier code here. We'll press enter. And then we have to enter the invoice date. And here we have to enter the reference as we enter in the Myro screen also. So let's enter a reference here. Now you can see here there is a table given for entering the posting lines. Now what we are going to do here is we are going to post the value of the invoice against a consumption GL against which the vendor has executed the job. That is, the vendor has supplied you the material or has executed a service. The GL in which you will book the consumption of that material or the service, that GL you have to enter here. So what we are doing is we are skipping the whole process of purchase order and goods receipt. We are directly posting this particular invoice against a consumption GL. As you know that in non-PO route there is no inventory involved. So you'll have to enter a consumption GL directly and you will process the invoice against this consumption GL only. Now you can see here, I can enter multiple line items in this particular table. So let's say that the vendor has raised an invoice and the amount of the invoice you want to post against multiple consumption GLs. So here we'll enter the line items that are the consumption GLs against which you want to post the respective amounts. And here we'll enter the invoice amount that has been claimed by the vendor. So you can enter multiple GL accounts here against which you want to book the consumption with their respective amounts. And here you have to enter the invoice amount that has been claimed by the vendor. Now in this example, we'll enter only one line item and see how we can post a non-PO invoice. So let's enter a GL account here. And here we'll enter the invoice amount that has been raised by the vendor. So let's say that vendor has raised an invoice for 100 rupees. So we'll enter 100 here and we'll press enter. Then we'll have to enter a tax code. Now you see system gives me an error that account requires an account assignment relevant to cost accounting. Now why this error is coming? Because we are posting in a consumption GL which is a cost element. So we will have to enter a cost object against this particular line. So to enter the cost object, we'll scroll right. And here you can see either I can enter a cost center or an order, or I can enter a sales order, or I can enter a WBS element also. All these are the cost objects which you can enter against this particular GL. Now this totally depends upon the business scenario that against which cost object you are going to post this consumption. That is against which cost object the expense was booked. That is the activity was executed. Okay. So let's enter a cost center here. So we'll scroll right and we'll enter a cost center here and we'll press enter. Now you can see we have entered 100 rupees against this GL account and we have entered a cost center. Now here we'll enter the invoice amount as we enter in the Miro screen also. So let's enter 100 rupees here. Let's click on calculate tax. Then we'll enter business place. Now our invoice is ready. Now let's simulate this. So now you can see here in this document what all line items will get posted. So you have a liability getting created against the vendor, that is 100 rupees liability. You can see a credit entry here, and then you have a debit entry in the consumption GL that we entered in the FB60 screen, and then there is a tax entry. So what is happening here is you are creating liability against the vendor by directly entering the invoice in this FB60 transaction. And since you have entered the consumption GL, so the debit entry gets posted directly to that consumption GL and your invoice will get posted. So now let's save this. So you can see here this document has been posted, and if you want to display this document, then you can go here and click on display, and you can see this document has been created through FB60. And if you want to see the balance against the vendor code, then we can go to T code FBL1N. So let's open FBL1N. Let's enter the vendor code and execute. So now you can see here this 100 rupees is the liability which was created directly through the FB60 transaction. If you want to verify, then you can double click this document and you can go to the header data, and you can see here the T code is FB60. So this is how you process the invoice through non-PO route. That is, you do not create any purchase order, you do not do any goods receipt, and you do not process the invoice through Miro transaction. You simply post a vendor invoice through FB60 where you enter the vendor code, the amount of the invoice, and the GL account against which the consumption is to be booked. And then when you post this invoice, system creates a liability against the vendor, which then you can process through the payment program. So this is all about how you can process a vendor invoice through non-PO route. I hope that you've understood this concept. Now this is a step which is directly done by the finance team, but this invoice may require an endorsement from the MM person, that is from the functional person. The functional person will approve the invoice that this activity was done by the vendor, and finance will process the invoice through this FB60 transaction. So I hope that you have liked this video. If you like my videos, then please like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be putting more content on the SAPMM module. See you in the next video. Thank you so much for supporting me. Thanks a lot.